Good evening or good morning, depending on what it is near you, and welcome to the Templar Report with me, your guest presenter for today, Nick Griffin. And if you look at your clock on your computer, or if you on your watch, if you still have such an old-fashioned thing, you'll see we're bang on time for starting. So you see, if you want the gift of the gab, the stuff, you've got to go for the Irish, or the people who don't think they're Irish. If you want pure, cold, clinical efficiency, you need the English. So there you go. But welcome to you wherever you are. If you're not lucky enough in life's lottery to have been born English, well, commiserations. But most of you are pretty damn good anyway. Before I start, don't forget, like the video, subscribe, get notified, share the video. Share, share, share. Thank you. So, by the way, although we've got English efficiency today, while I'm in the seat here, we've got an Irishman on the troll hammer. So, give it to those trolls. If they rear their ugly heads, bang, squish them. So, let's have a look and see who we got in here today. Switching over. So, right at the top, who have I got right at the top? William Petit, first man in. Pleased to see you, Will. Christopher Strid, Paul Telford. Paul, many thanks for all the memes and video clips and so on you send me. I do, as I'm sure you see, put them up on Twitter, Parler and on Telegram. So if you're not following me, if you're one of our guests, please do. But again, Paul, thanks so much for all that help. It's very, very useful. Johan Egerström, pleased to see you from over there. Jonathan Badine, regular from Canada. Burton Myers from Michigan. Pleased to see you. Lady Rother from the Isle of Man. Good to see you as always. Bert Myers, Regalia and Pack arrived this morning. Awesome. Well, I'm pleased that you got it, and even more pleased that you're very happy with it. Everybody usually is. Michael B from Alberta, Canada. I've got some distant cousins in Alberta, Canada, but never have any contact with them. But they're Griffins. Andy McBride down in England. Not English, of course, but you can't help that, Andy. As good as English, anyway. Robert Erickson, Troy Otto from hello everyone, Barkley Burker, Ralph Roll, who else have we got? William Mumford, another Englishman, Gary Hardwick, good afternoon everyone from Warsaw, Virginia, Geminis Fortissimus, pleased to see you again as always, Dan Guerra, Kenneth Driver, Mark Anthony Smith, getting pretty much through it now I think, Neville Walker, also from just up the corner, Mark Green, hello Nick, Elliot Lamb, Jim, we're packed in here tonight, so I can't carry on going down that list, but good to see you all. Now I did see one thing there, Troy Otto saying, have people seen the boat parade? Perhaps you have a quick picture of this, Mr. Techie, if you've managed to get it. There you go, phenomenal, 2,500 small boats in a boat parade for Trump, showing that the grassroots are getting themselves mobilised and active. And they need to, because it's all against President Trump with the liberal elite, the controlled media, even parts of the armed forces saying that if he tries to refuse to leave office, President Trump must be removed by force. But of course, the only circumstances in which he might refuse to leave office is if the Democrats manage to push through in enough places this outrageous and blatantly fraudulent all postal voting operation. Postal votes are riddled with fraud. The Democrats in Britain, the Labour Party in Britain, the Democrats in the USA, they exchange information. When it comes to election times, they exchange personnel and they learn and they teach each other all the dirty tricks in the book. And they've got postal vote fraud off to a fine art. And if Donald Trump were to say, well, look, I've won this election and people know he's won the election, but we're being defrauded. Not me, actually, the American people are being defrauded. Therefore, I'm not going until this has gone through the High Court, until it's all been properly sorted out, until the law has been upheld. Then the Democrats are already saying, then at that point, we've got to use force to overthrow him and enforce a totally fraudulent election result over the backs of the American people. Scandalous thing, and you can see it coming. So it's great to see with that boat parade that the grassroots are getting themselves organised. Really good. So thank you, Troy, for bringing that onto our attention. Now, a phrase you often hear when people are complaining about the state of the world, the fallen world, is, oh, they should do something. And I want people to think about that phrase, they should do something. But before we do that, let's have a look at the work of a man who did something. St Mary's Church in Houghton on the Hill, Norfolk, was at Norfolk's county in the east of England, bit that sticks out into the North Sea. Very much a rural county. It's got some beautiful churches, and one of them, once upon a time, was the Anglo-Saxon Church of St Mary's on the Hill, which was, or is, over 1,000 years old. And if we can see pic number 1, well, you can't really see the church, in fact, when you look at that, because it's a mass of ivy, because at this stage it was completely derelict. It had been struck by a German bomb from the Zeppelin during the First World War, still just about used, then abandoned in the 1930s. It was looted for artefacts, I'm sorry to say, by American GIs during the run-up to D-Day when they were stationed near there. Worse still, it had had a satanic temple and a pagan altar built into it. The grave of one of the previous vicars had been dug up and his skull had been used in black magic ceremonies. Pretty grim stuff. And then a man named Bob Davey came across this church while he was out walking with his wife one afternoon and decided to do something about it. He had a struggle because, for a start, you couldn't even get to the church until he found an ancient law which said that you've got a right to build a church, a road across land to get to a church. So he did that. He had to fight with the church authorities who wanted this 1,000-year-old church torn down. And in the end, he embarked what was an afternoon's rambling turned into a 22-year crusade to save this church. Pic number 2, please. This shows obviously the inside of the church. As you see, the roof completely collapsed, rotted away, an absolutely terrible state. And at this stage, as he began the work, Bob found that the Satanist cult didn't like what he was doing. It was still a consecrated church, but they were horrified that he was saving it and obviously going to expel them and their devilry. And so he was under death threat. He had to guard the church at night. He slept there. One member of this satanic cult drove a car at him and they sent him death threats. At one point, members of the Territorial Army, that's Britain's reserve army, volunteered. They heard about what was going on and they volunteered to help Bob. So these Satanist scumbags turned up there one night to harass and threaten him again. And out of the mists from the bushes and from behind the graves rose off-duty soldiers who chased these people off, and that was the end of the problems. But still, a huge amount of work had to be done. Now, while Bob was repairing this church, he was at one stage repairing a big crack in one of the walls, which had been opened up by the German bomb. And he found that under the plaster, despite the state of the church, under the plaster, there were the most amazing 1,000-year-old wall paintings that had been covered up under whitewash plaster of the Reformation. Before he could get onto that, his first job was simply to save the structure that was on the point virtually of falling down. And he had to take down, the tower had a huge crack running literally from top to bottom. So he had to take down large parts of the flint walls, and flints are rocks like this, no bigger than this. So he had to take them all down and then painstakingly, one by one, put them back together with the lime mortar that has to be used. And as you see in the next picture, Bob Davey succeeded. So here's the church now. It was surrounded by overgrown woodland, so he's cleared the graveyard, built a path to it, and you can now see that tower looking absolutely beautiful, crisp and good for another 1,000 years. And Mr. Davey said, I want to quote him here, he said, "It's cost me a lot of money, it's cost me no end of time, but look what I've got out of it." You've got to do something when you retire. You can't sit around watching the telly all day. Well, amen to that. Now, this gets, I think, really to the fascinating bit, or the inspiring bit for me, that Bob only began this work when he was 63 years old. While he was doing it, his wife died, and she was buried in this churchyard, in this church that Bob Davey had saved. This is the remarkable bit, truly remarkable bit. Pic 4, please, Mr. Techie Man. See, Bob is 85 years old. This one man became 85 while he was doing this and saved. You see there, you can see some of the obviously very faded paintings underneath, some of them still to be exposed by removing more plaster. The windows restored, looking absolutely beautiful. The roof as good as the day it was built. But what a remarkable thing. And now that picture was taken 6 years ago, and since then he's still kept on working, so he's now 91. Bob Davey is still in that church most days, just to make sure the Satanists can't turn up and desecrate it again, and to welcome visitors to it. Because this is a truly unique church. These have been declared to be the oldest church paintings in the whole of England, if not the whole of Britain. And they and the church are a unique reminder of the fact that before Protestantism, before 1066, and the imposition of the Norman Church on Britain, Celtic and English Christianity were extremely close to what is now only survives in the Orthodox Church. It's a real fantastic piece of history. And remember, all that would have collapsed or would have been demolished if it hadn't been for the work, for the love of one old man. It just shows what you can do, doesn't it? If you've got, or we find a vocation and a mission. So I said at the start, I wanted to make people think about this phrase, they should do something. Now, you can't say they should do something unless you find something to do yourself. Then you have a right to demand of other people, to lecture other people, to criticize other people. But it starts with all of us. It starts with the individual. Now, I'd like to switch over here and have a look at some of the comments, see what you think of Bob Davey and his work. So let's go down to the bottom. So I'm missing many comments here, I'm sure. So what have we got? Oh, down. So I haven't got a techie man doing this for me. What a good, positive story, says Joseph Brooks. Exactly so. It's very, very easy, isn't it, to get sort of bogged down in doom and gloom and the end of the world is nigh and we'll be the last one standing. But I think it's really good to have a good, positive story. Spider Rogers says, good to see you, Spider. That's too cool. Ms. Cherry B. I hope it's not Cherie Blair. God bless him. I doubt it, because Cherie Blair would be there with the Satanists, not with the good guys, I think. Michael B. Good story, Mr. Griffin. It's not me, it's Bob. As Paul Telford says, a true hero, Bob. As William Petit says, never let age stop us. They have sport. Ewan Eggerstrom. He looks like my grandfather, but with a bigger beard. Interesting that, because see, Norfolk, sticking out of the east coast of England, has, the DNA evidence shows, one of the highest concentrations of Saxon and Danish blood, because for many years it was probably easier to sail across the North Sea than it was to get across muddy roads from 10 or 15 miles inland. So yeah, there is indeed lots of Scandinavian blood there in Norfolk, and it's wonderful to see, well, what that man did. Really, really tremendous, I think. So let's move on. We've got, we're not yet 6:15, so that's good, because I've got something else now, having dealt with that. I had such a positive reaction to the reading from Deus Vult that I did just before the weekend, that I thought we'd do a little bit more. Now, we're not going to read the whole book, because I'm well aware that people want the pleasure of reading the book for themselves, not having me read it to you. So what I'll do instead today, just a few short extracts from a few of the different chapters to give you an idea of the scope of the book. The one which I read the other day was a whole chapter, one subject, so many different ones. First of all, quite a lot of the chapters really deal with analysis, explanation, or education. This is on the principle of know thine enemy. You don't just have to come up with ideas for fighting, you have to know what you're fighting. That's absolutely the starting point. So an example, this is from a chapter simply entitled Political Correctness, which one of the editors who proofread it said to me she thought was probably the best chapter in the book. I don't want to judge that, but I do think it's pretty good. So this starts partway through. While the apparent lunacy of the politically correct often inspires derision, it is anything but a joke. Political correctness is not only a form of narrative control and truth suppression, but a type of relentless bullying. Speech codes, propaganda lies, and even compulsory masks, subjugation to which no one is allowed to object, reinforce the individual's sense of powerlessness. If you can get people to assent to obvious lies, or better yet, to repeat them, or better still to absorb them, which is to say to lie to themselves, there is virtually nothing you can't make them do. You have broken the seal, as drinkers say. It is as if you'd forced a man to murder an innocent or to rape his own sister. You destroyed a piece of his soul. You forced him to surrender, to submit, to choose pragmatism over rectitude, to abandon his reason for the sake of social or professional survival. Once a man has lost his sense of shame, of pride, of agency, of integrity, once he has abandoned his own conscience and put on a performance for all the world to see in order to be socially accepted, he is nothing but a sheep being led to slaughter. He has been subjugated completely. His heart is a gaping wound. He has been warped and debased to his core, to his essence as a man. We must understand political correctness as a very intense form of psychological and spiritual warfare. The goal of it is not just to censor ideas and words and to keep people in the dark. The ultimate goal is to destroy the subject's sense of right and the subject's sense of shame, and most importantly, the subject's will to resist, to live a life of authenticity, of honour, of virtue. Once these dams of principle, conscience, probity, integrity, honour and civic virtue are broken, vice follows effortlessly downhill, dragging the individual in its wake and drowning the societies living in the shadow of the invisible buttresses that once upheld human civilization. Now the chapter goes on to explain precisely where this came from, and it points out particularly huge importance of a man called Georg Lukács, who was a leading member of the Jewish intelligentsia who seized power in the Bolshevik Revolution, short-lived, mercifully, revolution in Hungary in 1919 at the end of the First World War. Having gone through what Lukács's ideas were and how in the end they went first to Germany and then to the United States and hence the West, the chapter continues. As well as writing in favour of political terror and mass murder, Lukács developed the theory that sex and sexual deviancy could be used as wrecking balls to destroy the Christian values of the old order, something he believed essential to the success of the communist revolution. Lukács summed up his nihilistic creed with the words, "I want a culture of pessimism, a world abandoned by God." Pessimism and perversion, in addition to sexual license being used to subvert Christian values and traditional morality, the fanning of grievances among homosexuals, feminists, and more recently the sexually confused, was also seen as a useful way to build a coalition of militant minorities who, together with their counterparts among racial and religious minorities, would help to overthrow the old order and clear the way for communist revolution. When we understand political correctness in this way, we understand it not only to be an assault on the truth, which it is of course, but also as the main front of a war on human liberty itself, on free minds, on free peoples, on free nations, and on God. Political correctness paves the way for the army of horrors behind it by turning madness into gospel, meekness into fashion, and surrender into habit. Vanquished, demoralised peoples do not fight back. They do not rise up and deliver themselves from tyranny, whether the overlords are jackbooted communist commissars or Gucci-wearing bosses of liberal corporations. Instead, they applaud rather than cringe, as all people of sound mind would when their overlords trot out on national television an 11-year-old drag queen dressed up as a street hooker. They smile obediently when little boys are paraded as paedophile sex objects on gay pride parades. They do nothing when told that 9-year-old children are perfectly capable of deciding to start physically changing sex via powerful, permanently mind-altering and body-altering pharmaceuticals and by genital mutilation. They repeat the anti-natural insanity of the claim that young men who identify as women can have periods or go to the doctor and insist on being checked for cervical cancer. They play along when cultural Marxist oligarchs and media personalities tell us that flooding the country with criminals and borderline imbeciles from the third world will lead us to moral and social progress. They remain silent when they're told that whites are the real racists for not wanting to be systematically racially discriminated against in jobs and university admissions countrywide. They say nothing when brutal physical attacks against innocent white men and women are ignored or excused on the utterly spurious grounds that they're legitimate to pay back for centuries of exploitation and persecution. They turn away or even join in when the few brave souls who still dare to speak out against such follies and injustices are demonised, deplatformed, dismissed from their jobs, beaten and jailed. They allow elites to subject them to mass house arrest under blatantly false pretexts, accepting the loss of their most basic freedoms, not on pain of death, but rather than defy snitches, bribes, bullying, and propaganda. Those who are sent to absurdity are already halfway to atrocity. They have sacrificed a piece of their soul for security, but will never receive it. The universe has never rewarded and never will reward a coward's attempt to bargain. So I think that is indeed quite a powerful and effective piece, and particularly apposite for our time with the COVID nonsense, the lockdowns, the second lockdown coming as we said that it would. But the book doesn't just deal with problems. We decided very early on when looking at the balance of what was to go in it. There's a lot of problems to be talked about, but if you only talk about problems, there's a danger in the end you just demoralise people. You have to talk about solutions. And the first part of the solution, since in the end we're dealing with a spiritual sickness and everything that follows in the material world follows from that, the first part of the solution must of course be spiritual. So there are a number of chapters dealing with this. One of them is called Chivalry for the 21st Century, and it looks at the ways in which the chivalric values of knightly orders such as the Templars must apply today. A little extract. These then are the 10 pillars of modern Templar chivalry. Believe in the teachings of our Lord Jesus Christ and apply them in daily life. Defend traditional Christianity, cleaving to your own confession, but respecting that of others. Respect and defend the weak against abuses by the strong. Love the people and sovereignty of your country, for they are ordained by God. Do not be a coward. Face the enemy and use direct force. Fight the enemies of good relentlessly and without mercy. Perform all secular duties under the higher laws of God. Never lie nor breach your word. Be reliable for your friends and even for your foes. Give generously and wholeheartedly, striving to make a difference for the better. Always uphold right and good against all evil and injustice. In a very real, practical and meaningful way, values are the pillars of civilization. The modern West is infected, sick unto death, with various virulent strains of atomized and selfish individualism, cynical and ugly anti-idealism, and subverted by the worship of false gods, from Allah to sex to Mammon, and then the short step further to Satan. Truly, my brothers and sisters in Christ, there has never been a time when the revival of the true Christian values of the original Fighting Knights Templar has been more urgently needed than today. And then, having dealt with the spiritual, the book and a number of chapters in it, go on to look at the practical side, advice for daily life, particularly for young men who are uniquely abandoned, preyed upon, put down, ignored, discriminated against in every way. The men of our kind, the young men of our kind, the young men of our faith, or from heritage from our faith. And this book both repeatedly challenges them. This isn't easy reading for young men. Many of them, I think, will be horrified and will turn away. But the ones who get it could easily be shaken out of bad ideas, false ideas, failed ideas, and saved and to turn into real, powerful warriors in the cause for the struggle, which is only just beginning. So the young men are both challenged and guided. An example of this is the chapter simply entitled Be a Man. One of the sections of this is headed The Central Goal, the True Measures of Success for a Man. The main goal, the most vital role, the essence of being a man, and the crux of patriotism is continuing the survival of one's own people. Therefore, nothing is as important as breeding more of your people, stroke tribe. This is a simple fact of nature and the first law of God. Be fruitful and multiply, we're instructed in Genesis. Having children of your own is your first duty and highest purpose. In all probability, it will also give you the greatest joy. And joy is something very rare and precious in this vale of tears. It may be anathema to pencil-neck Malthusians and bourgeois snobs, but better 10 uneducated kids in abject material poverty than one intellectual and spoilt little princess or prince. Numbers matter. They will have your DNA and your intelligence, so they will rise to the top, come what may. Nothing else actually matters other than reproducing. Everything is secondary to this immutable cosmic reality. No babies, no tribe, no nothing. Just silence, an empty space that will be filled by other tribes in the absence of your seed. Forget every other thing you need, desire or aspire to. Breed first, do everything else later. There are no pockets in the shroud that awaits you. There are no rich men in heaven. What lives on after you're gone? Nothing. Save your grandchildren, memories of what you did with them and for others, and your reputation. So, looking at the time, it's 18:26. I think we've got a bit more time. Let's just have a look and see if we've got any current comments. If I can get this down to where we are at the bottom. God bless this man. Oh, that's still about good old Bob. Let's go down. William Petit, we homeschooled our boys. Now our oldest sons are homeschooling their children. Fantastic, great. And that's another thing picked out in this book in a number of places. That there's a fair few of the white racist types out there saying, oh yes, you've got to have kids. It's all about just the numbers. And yes, as I said, it is about the numbers, but it's also not about having children. It's about rearing them right. And if you have children and then hand them over to the state education system, and even before that, hand them over to the internet, to MTV and all the rest of the carcinogenic poison spewed out by Hollywood and similar places and the people who control Hollywood, then there's no point having them in the first place. It has to be a double act, having the children and rearing them right. T.T. Foley, Patriotic Alternative are going to be big. Well, to be fair to Patriotic Alternative, I've criticised them. Jim's criticised them as well. I criticised them a lot not long ago for telling people there's an electoral solution to all this. It's nonsense. And I said that if they started to do something really useful like homeschooling, that I'd praise that. And yes, indeed, I did yesterday on social media, and I do right now, that they come up with a really good selection of homeschooling aids for use primarily in Britain. So fair play, it is indeed good. Daniel Mills, PayPal, can you use PayPal to order the book? Perhaps the techie man can comment on that, or please ask questions like that on Discord. I'm told by the techie man the answer is no. Other ways to do it. Aidan Brennan, the BBC is poison. Indeed so, absolutely. Ryan McGinley, cannot wait to read. James Partridge, I'm looking forward to this book. When will it be dispatched? It'll be dispatched as soon as the personal order copies are in. That's out of my hands. You see, that's not in the hands of the English. That's in the hands of the Irish and the Scots. So I wash my hands of it. I know that everything will be done to get it to you as quickly as possible. And I think people are going to be delighted. It's well worth the wait. So let's go back to the book for just a few more minutes. Thank you for all your kind comments. Thank you for being here. As always, don't forget, like the video, subscribe, do all the things you should be. Like, and share. So, whatever the book actually deals with, chapter by chapter, the overall message is about the battle for the survival of Christendom and the people who created it, and an informed, balanced, and really full explanation as to the threats. And here's probably the closing sample. This gives an example of that. Since the civilizational challenges facing us are religious, a religion is the only thing that can counter them. Them? Yes, because there are two of them. Islam, actually a political system disguised as a religion, and liberalism, which is a godless cult intertwined with capitalist self-interest and greed. One worships a moon god, the other Mammon, the god of gold. Islam may be the most obvious enemy, but it was liberalism that helped open the gates of the West to the followers of the Prophet. Both must be destroyed if Christendom is to live, and only Christianity has the moral power both to bring an end to the worship of Mammon and to inspire the new crusade, which is the only thing that can drive Islamism back into the desert from which it emerged. Those who are fortunate enough to believe will know this already, but even those who lack the gift of faith must recognise that it's true. So, because a revived Christianity is vital to the survival of the West, all those who want the West to survive must also do what they can to ensure the survival of Christianity and its restoration as the moral and spiritual heart of our world. If you can also believe that Jesus Christ is the Son of God, so much the better. If you do not, then what harm can it do to pay lip service to the faith that helped create the greatest civilization the world has ever seen? Cultural Christianity won't save your immortal soul, but at least it will help the survival of your people and civilization. So if it is all you can profess at present, at least it is a start. Even if the whole thing were a myth, it is a myth so powerful, a myth with such a hold over men, that for these last 1500 years, it has inspired men to die for it without question or hesitation. A myth that caused men to build the edifice of the West in granite blocks is a myth that only an imbecile would reject or refuse to cultivate when facing a time when we will be in a fight in which we either win or face annihilation. This is the key that will unlock the future resistance and reconquista in the lands of the West. The last decade has already shown us an example of the extraordinary power of Christianity to revive souls and to inspire a victorious counter-revolution. After nearly a century of repression, Christianity has now vanquished Bolshevism in Russia and the East. The same will happen in the West, in the long war, against not just the Islamist plague, but also the liberal virus that unleashed it. In the future conflict, we cannot afford to be divided or engage in never-ending intellectual debates, or be led by men who use conversation and ideas to mask their own cowardice and weakness when faced with the enemy hordes. We need men who, despite coming from different backgrounds and nations, are united. Men who have fire in their bellies, steel in their hands, and burning zeal in their souls. Men who embrace death and glory, and who think in an eternal way. With such men, our victory is assured. Without such men, we are certainly doomed. Where can we find those men? What faith will unify and inspire those men? What could it be, save the faith of our fathers? Whether it is a reality or just a wonderfully powerful myth, it is the simple Christian faith, not political ideology or philosophical waffle, that will produce and inspire the resistance and reconquista that are the only things that can now save the West. It will be those plain and simple men who follow the blood-red banner of the cross, who will face the foe undaunted, who will die where they stand rather than bow the knee to an alien false idol. These are the men whose sons and daughters will inherit, cleanse, and one day rebuild the ruins of the West. Whether they wave one finger to represent their recycled moon god, believe that he only cares for their gang, or deny that God exists at all, the only possible effective answer to our enemies is the three-fingered Trinity salute of the coming Reconquista. God the Father, God the Son, and God the Holy Ghost. In hoc signo vinces. Deus vult.